We're on to unity, the final principle of design for this course. You almost have every tool in your tool belt in order to become great designers. So, very exciting. We're getting closer. So, the word unity really means the state of being united or joined as a whole. That's why we've saved it for last. So this concept of unity, what it really does is kind of gives us that warm and fuzzy feeling at the end of the day, where we can look at a design and feel that it's very complete, whole, cohesive, and finished, essentially. So the way we're going to go about doing that is creating variety along with harmony. This will make all of our elements and principles of design kind of sing and work together. So starting with variety, what this means is more of a difference or a contrast of playing with elements and principles within the design. So basically, think of the word, what does the word variety mean to you? So when we have lots of different things that can interest us typically, or capture and keep our attention. But we have to be really careful, because if we have too much variety, then we might get confused and have a difficult time either understanding the visuals or being able to make a choice or the best choice for us. And with too little variety, we could just get bored. So I like to think here to not just a visual variety, but think about going to the grocery store. When you go down an aisle like the cereal aisle, sometimes, depending on the store that you're shopping at, it's pretty overwhelming, and unless you kind of have a history of knowing which cereal maybe you grew up with, it might be hard for you to actually make a choice, especially if you want to try something new. So think about that as you're applying this concept again to visuals. Too much can be too much and not really good for us. But then again, if we go to another grocery store, say the differences between Meijer, that has, again, every different kind of cereal under the sun, versus, I'm trying to think of a smaller grocery store, maybe like an Aldi or a Trader Joe's that's become a little more specialized. You might, go to that cereal section, it's probably not an aisle, and feel like there aren't as many options as you really wanted. So then you're disappointed again, and you're unhappy with the choice you get to make. So again, this is a little more conceptual rather than visual, but you can start to see how this idea can kind of come together in a design. So the trick is to create designs with just the right amount of variety, so enough variety to create interest, but not to overwhelm the viewer. So what we're really looking for here is balance. And then finally, harmony. So again, if you have variety and harmony working hand in hand, then you'll most likely have a very successful design. So what happens when you have a harmonious design is really all of those elements and principles are sort of singing and working together to again create that very solid feeling that everything is complete and pleasing. So as we talk about unity in this PowerPoint presentation, we're going to consider 8 different principles, these Gestalt principles, which I learned back in my architectural days. And essentially what they mean, they can be considered Gestalt principles, or also you could think of it as the law of simplicity. It's how we organize visual elements into whole designs. And remember, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So this is really our goal at the end of the day. So let's take a look at the first, similarity. Similarity really occurs when things, one, look similar and are therefore grouped in our minds. So this can be done with color, line, or shape, and so on and so forth. And these visual effects that we group together as one in our mind, again, are usually done through leading our eye throughout the entire composition. So in clothing stores, items might even be stacked by color or by shade or by style to give the impression that they go together. So this example here on the left uses similar colors, lines, and shapes. So you can see color is being repeated on even the forehead of the model, that pink line, it's in her garment, and then a pop on her shoe as well. We use lots of organic, curvilinear line to create this very form-fitting garment on the body as well. I also think it's really interesting not just using that feminine organic line to create the form-fitting silhouette or hourglass shape, but I really love how this garment really undulates in the thinness and thickness of line. So you can see the smallest part of the body, the waist, really has the thinnest lines, and this grid then sort of morphs to like her hip and thighs and shoulders and bust, where the line then really thickens with this like wrapped velvet tube around the body. So again, really interesting design and concept in my opinion, and very nice use of similarity to create that unified look. And then we have this Kate Spade ad where we have more, again, kind of similarity happening. And what are we using? We're using color, the text, in the garment, shoes, the purse. We have that pop of yellow color, which goes very spring, summer, and matches the garment and environment really, really well. We also have that wind catcher sort of shape being repeated. You can see it almost in the neckline and her collar as well, sort of draws our eye to that central point and moves it around a little bit. But that's a really nice kind of sense of movement and playfulness that we're repeating with that wind catcher concept. So how are we making the bag the most important? And we'll learn this a little in a couple slides, but one nice thing is that we're just simply placing the bag even close to the model so that we kind of understand that they're supposed to go together. And then once again, really it's the use of color and even that kind of boxy shape that we see in the garment and in the handbag that really make us think they are a set and this is a complete sort of look. The next Gestalt principle to take a look at is containment. So containment is when the outer edge of the composition or the boundary contains the rest of the design. This could be actual edges or an actual change in color or line, or it could be part of the silhouette as well. So on the left, this architectural building in Malaysia, it's really the outside of the building, the silhouette that contains the rest of the structure that we see as a whole. So it's those big vertical columns and striation that holds those more fragile kind of window and glass frames in to the building. So it's that structure that's containing this building and creating a unified and very strong look. That use of vertical line also creates that very imposing, formal stable, expressive quality. And then the garment on the right, really, again, another very interesting design here. And it's that outer rim that is containing the garment and really holding it together. So you can see these very kind of fragile, it almost looks like, you all probably didn't have videotapes and video recorders. Maybe you did as a kid. But when I was a kid, I would listen to tapes for music and videos, like VHS videos, and this is what the inner, like the film would look like. So when I was being a bad kid and I would pull out the film, this is, again, maybe how this designer was inspired to create this garment. So a very kind of, once again, very fragile, thin composition within the interior of the garment that then has that nice, almost wrapped, thick line containing and holding the structure together on that outer boundary. That most likely has some sort of wire within it to hold the shape of this garment. Repetition. You guys have heard it 1,000 times. It almost starts to get funny, but I promise now that we've gone through most of the elements and principles, you won't hear it quite as much. But repetition, again, incredibly important. Great way to make us feel like a composition belongs together, because we know we use repetition when we think something is really important within our design. When that visual effect kind of repeats over and over again, it reinforces that bigger idea, and that, again, it's all one design. So in the Mulberry advertisement, you can see that colors, like the greens and pinks within the design, and flowers and chair, and even the model's hair color, once again, sort of tie everything together. So here it's that playfulness and repetition of color and all the different layers and all the different aspects of the visual that sort of unify this visual. And just the fact that we've used even flowers all over to create that very soft and feminine concept. We've even mimicked that idea of sort of frilliness within and girliness in the pink color of her garment and that ruffle on the jacket as well. So what do you think is the item that's being sold in this advertisement? If you think the bag, that blue bag, you would be right. So it's really that purse that we feel like is part of the garment simply because of proximity, which we'll look at in just a moment, and placement. But it also has this great use of contrast that makes our eye go to that bag, because nothing really else in this composition is blue. There's a little sprinkling of blue flowers, but this is really the most different thing that we see, and it draws our eye to it. On the garment on the right, it's really the width of the lines, even within the shoes, the color, this use of this shiny purple, very high textured fabric. We see all these things throughout the design being repeated that gives us this sense of unity. So from the neckline with that high shine, again, use of diagonal line throughout the garment to move our eye all the way through, and then, repeating that kind of sparkle and fun, playful line within those shoes on the hardware as well. And of course that color pink. So proximity, as I promised, that was coming right up, really is referring to the distance between visual elements. So how close something is literally put to something else to build this idea of unity. So as we mentioned in the Mulberry advertisement, it's the purse simply being almost like it's in the model's hand. It's almost as if she's holding that bag. And it being, again, closely associated with her through physical presence very near and to the body. In the other advertisement, or display, if you want to think of it that way, it's really the scarf. Although it's a different color of red, the fact that it sits with other accessories, we are meant to start to think that it goes with those shoes. So simply by placing the shoe near the scarf, it does have that nice pull of red color in part of it. Makes us think, again, it belongs together. It almost looks like it's wrapping around the heel of the shoe saying, buy both of us. We come as a complete package. So through that use of color and line, really, we feel like these items belong together. Continuity. So with continuity, what we're trying to do, the idea here is that a viewer tends to continue shapes beyond their ending point, essentially. Moving from one shape or object to another causes this sort of fluid connection in a composition. So in the room, let's say on the right, your eye kind of continuously moves throughout different objects because it uses really similar shapes and colors. So this very kind of geometrical square and use of horizontal line and that gray, somewhat overall gray color palette is what's meant to sort of lead us through the overall kind of composition. On the left-hand side, we again use line and color. You can see line and color are pretty powerful. We've talked a lot about line, color, and shape, just three elements that have really hammered home some of these great ways to unify designs. So you can see again I'm going to focus on the women's garment here. So your eye really follows the top of the garment and sort of then jumps to the bottom. Although they're marked as sort of separate items, and this is dress, it almost feels like a top and a skirt, but they still feel unified because of that white background, the black motif on the foreground, and then really just by using that same sort of twisted shape in the top and the bottom of the garment and just playing with scale to create that idea of variety, but so it's still very interesting to us, unifies this entire garment together, makes it very complete. Figure ground. So this is our perceptual tendency to really separate whole figures from their background. So in a sense, camouflage would be the opposite of figure ground because it'd be very difficult to separate the background from the foreground. It's meant to completely blend in. So again, consider camouflage the contrast to figure ground. So in our figure ground example, on the left, how are we still creating unity? So although we've separated one through color, the background, this book, the words on the page of this writing, this letter, and it says, if you can read you can't really read the quote, it's a little difficult, but it says, if you really want to touch someone, send them a letter. So it's for the post office, which I think is a really lovely concept and advertisement for them. So one, we're creating contrast. We have this, a real person and then this a little more, perception of a person. But how are they unifying? It's through that hug, right? So we still have contrast through color and concept, but it's the hug and the wrapping of the arms that makes us know they sort of belong together. So again, really kind of lovely, big idea in this visual. So we also are using line as a figure ground connection in the advertisement on the right for Fendi. So although the woman is obviously separate from her background, they're doing a couple really nice things to sort of blend the concept together. Why did they place her there? Why is that tree in the background? Why isn't it just a plain white background? Well, through the use of line, you can see the branches in that tree are mimicked in the model's stance. She has this sort of broken, very kind of organic stance. Her arms are bent like the branches of a tree. Her hair is windswept like the leaves in those branches. And then once again, even all that texture that you can see on her garment kind of mimics this idea of the tree trunk's bark, or sort of textured surface. So super playful, amazing, I think, way of sort of connecting that background with the foreground to sort of tell a story and show some inspiration simply through visuals. There is not one word on this page. We just make this unified connection through these very simple moves with the elements and principles of design. Closure. So the concept of closure is when there are details missing from a familiar image or some type of pattern, and our brains just sort of naturally fill them in. So we can complete sort of an anticipated line or shape through this concept. So you might be able to see, I just got rid of it, this advertisement for Neiman Marcus of their jewelry spring line. And if we had one of those rings sort of missing, our mind would still close that line, that jewelry line, as that central part of the leaf, that vein that runs through the middle. So again, in our head, we create closure naturally with the missing ring, purely because we're hardwired to know that that is the way a leaf is composed. So taking something familiar is probably the best trick when using this concept within your design, in order to make sure that your viewer really is understanding the concept of closure in their mind. So why do we even take away a piece of jewelry? Well, it's to add a little bit of interest, right? And a little variety in our minds. And same can be said with this piece of landscape. So I know, again, it's a very, very simple example, but in our minds we know that these plants should be in one complete circle. That's the goal. So in our head, while the loop is not completely sealed tight with those plants, our mind and our eye closes it for us. And then finally, we have order. So unity can really be created by order, even creating a strict order. So a succession, a sequence, a system of organization. So this pattern on the right-hand side in the garment is really used in the same direction type. It's the same color. It's very simple. We use it in the hat, in the shoe, in the bag, in the garment. Again, because it doesn't change in scale or placement, it's easy to understand. It's a very systemized organization of motif. Same can be said with the polka dot as well. So we have very high, strong order in that example. And the image on the left, in this, shoe store design, I think this is really beautiful. because we sort of play with this almost broken rhythm. So we would anticipate this to be one full wall of grid that then sort of got played around with to make it visually more interesting. So there's still sort of an underlying structure there. I think in some ways we can even talk about closure with this display, this shoe display, because in my mind, once again, I know that there's a very rigid, same, size of box over and over again that then in my mind I kind of close on my own. So really fun and playful sort of display here for the shoes. And I kind of love how once you reach a certain level, when someone can no longer reach the shoes, they've included very neutral shoes, if you look closely, that sort of blend in with the background and are just part of the display, but not meant to be sort of accessed and tried on, etc. So really nice use of this playful type of order here. So I get a very simple, modern, clear, clean cut kind of concept from this visual. So we made it through all 8 different methods of Unity. So I'm going to just show you a few examples, and there's always typically always a couple extra slides that then you can do some extra practice at the end of the presentation. So I'm just going to go through 2 or 3 of these examples, and then you can take a little bit of time and practice the rest on your own. So let's run through this advertisement. We may not use every single method of Unity, but in this example we're using almost all of them. So regarding similarity, how are we creating Unity here? With the colors. It's all black and white. We've also played with very similar lines, horizontal lines, especially in the eye mask and the garment. And then texture as well becomes really important. So we have a little shine in the hair, on her lip, and then finally in her jewelry. We use containment, and this is seen really through her silhouette. We see it as one because we have this very strong, high contrast line that sort of maps out the visual, again, along the outer edge or outer boundary of her body. So we might be able to think of this as well as eccentricity, where the silhouette becomes really important way of viewing the model. And then we have repetition. What are we repeating? Very much like the use of similarity, we're repeating colors, lines, shapes, and textures. As far as proximity goes, all of the same, we have, everything happening in one place. Everything's happening on the same body. So we have that mask, eye mask, the necklace, and the dress all, again, on one figure. So it makes us focus on that. So with that being said, what do you think the item is that's for sale here? It's got to be the necklace, right? It's really the most prominent, interesting, and intricate item in this composition. They don't even want us looking at the model's eyes because they don't want us to be too distracted. They want us to go right to that necklace and focus on it. There's a little bit of continuity being used, maybe this idea of negative space that kind of moves our eye down throughout the design. It's not maybe the strongest use of Unity, but with figure ground, again, we have this very big separation from that black background to the white figure. But how are we playing with figure ground and making them feel related, like they're hugging and just like the example we just saw. We're using the garment, the black garment, and that eye mask once again to pull the background into the foreground. It almost looks like the background is the eye mask, the background is the garment, and it's reaching out and hugging this woman. And that gives us this sense of unity, that they belong together. We use closure as well. We just naturally continue the shape of her head, although that mask again bleeds into the background, but we know her head is there. So although we can't see the physical line, our minds close and suggest that she does have ears and a side of her head there. And then really, how are we creating order? This one is interesting. It's not through a grid necessarily, like the last example that we looked at with the shoe display, but order here is being created through simplicity. So that simple use of clean line, color, and a very clear focal point is how we're creating order and clarity. So let's practice just one more. So what are we doing here to create this sense of unity? Let's talk similarity. Once again, you guys have heard it a lot. Line, shape, texture, and color become huge, tools once again in your tool belt to sort of paint this overall sense of unity within your compositions. So that here is by way of very strict kind of gridded lines all the way to this really interesting kind of organic line that changes from the landscape into the tower of this building. By the way, this is not a real building. It might be real now, but this is simply a computer-generated image. So this is like a 3D model that an architect or a landscape designer would build to kind of pitch and sell a concept to their customer. Then we have containment. So the silhouette of the building is really what contains it. Those outer lines are very geometric and structured, and again, that sort of holds this glazing or very light and airy, more fragile seeming material all together as one. We use repetition through use of greenery throughout this sort of park, and even into the building is what it travels. So we know once again this landscape and the building belong together. Those lines once again morph into one another. They feel like they're meant to go hand in hand. And same with the shapes and textures. So with proximity, you can think about all these little diamond structures touching each other. So that's really what's helping kind of form the connection that they belong together. As far as continuity goes, our eye kind of moves from structure to structure with figure and ground. It's less emphasized here with color, but the shape helps sort of separate the background to the foreground. So not a very, very strong way of connecting sky, for example, with the building, but I would say it's that kind of light and airy cloud. Again, we got to really look hard here, and since it's computer generated image, they could have made the clouds look even more like the building, for example. But it is interesting, you can see again not only the white color of the cloud matching the white structure, that kind of, again, very loose sort of kind of breaking of the grid that happens on the tower itself, being kind of more flowy and organic like a cloud would be. But also I think how they're doing it, again, very subtly in my opinion, but it's by way of transparency with the use of glass and glazing, because you can start to see the sky, sort of that blue color, either being reflected in the glass or piercing through it. So that's their way of sort of tying figure ground together. But again, that takes, I think, a trained eye and some really looking really hard, which I'd love for you guys to do, but I know sometimes it drives you a little nutso bananas, and that's not my goal. Not my goal, but it's good practice. In regards to closure, really small thing, I would just say that within that tower, by use of line, we're meant to sort of understand that the structure closes the silhouette kind of on itself. I think closure is probably used the least in this example. And then finally, order. We have this really regulated, systematic lines and geometry and pattern that once again goes from, hardscape, landscape into this sort of sky, tower, and morphs somewhat. So lots to look at and lots to think about regarding unity. And I'll let you take the last few slides to do a little practicing on your own. So enjoy, and congratulations on making it to the end of the elements and principles of design.